Well, good evening. It's good to be with y'all tonight. I hope everybody's doing well. As we get started, I'd love to know if you're here. You make a comment there on Facebook or YouTube. I'd love to again know who's tuning in this morning or this evening. Let me know that you're here. As always, you can, if you have a prayer request or need or anything of that nature, feel free to also comment with that information as well. As we get going, I'm going to get a few things up on the screen. All right. Well, tonight we do have we're going to be looking a little bit more from John chapter 20. That was the service, or that was the passage that we looked at this past Sunday. And we're going to be looking at one particular part in that. But as we get going, I want to ask you this question, and feel free to comment. You can comment, again, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, and I love to see different comments here. But the question I wanted to ask was, who is one person in your life that taught you about Christ? And specifically, who was that person? And who is someone, and obviously many of us would have several different people, right? It wouldn't just be one person, but who was that one person, or who was one significant person that shared Christ with you in your life? I'd love to hear about that. I've had several youth workers, parents, pastor, but I do think of one particular. It was a children youth worker, Jamie Wood, and she shared Christ with me. And I remember her very. She's just a big part of my life at that time, and I remember she shared Christ. So who in your life has shared Christ? And you can share that anytime in this video tonight. But I'd love to see that. If you do have your Bible, I'd encourage you to open to John chapter 20. John chapter 20. We'll be looking at that passage, and we're going to actually be. I was reading some stuff by Charles Spurgeon, and perhaps you're familiar with Charles Spurgeon, one of the most famous preachers that there has been, and very famous in London, and very knowledgeable of the Word, and has some wonderful things to comment on in his ministry. And so we're going to be looking at John chapter 20, and I specifically want to look at John 20, 28. And this is that passage in regarding Thomas, and I'll read that whole section there, but focus in on verse 28. Now it says, "Now Thomas was one of the 12, called the twin, was not with him when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, 'We have seen the Lord.' But he said to them, 'Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and placed my finger into the mark of the nails, and placed my hand into his side, I will never believe. 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them, although the doors were locked. Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your fingers here and see in my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." My Lord and my God. Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you've seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." That section there we're going to look at is where Thomas says, "My Lord and my God." One of the most wonderful statements in all the Bible in reference to who Jesus is. And I love that. And so we're going to kind of walk through a little bit. And so again, this is actually based on a sermon from Charles Spurgeon. And some of the points of the sermon, there's actually other stuff in here, but I'm going to look at specifically what he says about this passage. And I thought it's really good and really kind of brings out several really key features of this short passage. And so this PowerPoint will have that information. Also, you can find this particular sermon online, and I can send you the link if you're interested of it. So one of the things that Spurgeon does is he goes through this text and he really focuses in specifically on my Lord and my God. And so he wants to really understand what is the meaning of that text and how does it apply to us today. One of the things that he does is he says, let's look at the exclamation of Thomas. Thomas, this was a very powerful exclamation. So let's look at it. I want you to make note of Psalm chapter 35, verse 23. Psalm 35, verse 23. In there it says, "Awake and rouse yourself for my vindication, for my cause, my God and my Lord." My God and my Lord. And you could say, my Lord and my God. And in that passage there, we see that the way that the psalmist uses Lord and God, my Lord and my God and my Lord. And obviously in that context, it speaks of God, and God is obviously God. So there's no debate in that. And Spurgeon makes this note that when Thomas says that, he obviously would have a background in Judaism. He would understand what that meant. And so he points to that this phrase brings out the divinity of Jesus. This phrase brings out the divinity of Jesus and fits into this larger framework of theology in the New Testament teaching on his divinity. And so he really brings that out. He says, listen, Thomas, when he says that, he knows exactly what he's saying. He's pointing to Jesus as God. Now, and he actually brings this out in the sermon, and other commentators have. Some would say, well, no, Thomas really wasn't saying this phrase to point out the divinity of Jesus. It was just more of like almost taking the Lord's name in vain. It just slipped out. No, that really doesn't make sense in this context. Thomas was pointing to the divinity of Jesus. And so that's a very powerful exclamation. Now, as you look at it, what are some qualities of this exclamation? Spurgeon says that this is an expression of holy wonder, where Thomas, it's beautiful. There's a wonder to it. When he says, Thomas answered him, my Lord and my God. Thomas is not pointing out, just not making some dry doctrinal statement. There's a wonder there. He's saying, my Lord and my God. You can almost hear it, right? You You can feel it as Thomas is saying this. His eyes have been opened to the reality of who Jesus is. It's a beautiful, beautiful passage. And he says, my Lord and my God. Now, let me pause just a moment here.